Journalistic failure? Well, after an explosion at the al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza on October 17th, headlines around the world and across the country declared that the Gaza Health Ministry said the blast had killed at least 500 people. But according to journalist David Zweig, after extensive investigation, he's found zero evidence that the health ministry spokesperson actually ever said that more than 500 people died, even though that figure was reported over and over and over again in mainstream media. Writer of the Silent Lunch newsletter on Substack, David Zweig, joins us now to discuss. Thank you for being back with us, David.
Thanks for having me.
So you did something pretty remarkable and also totally basic that far too few reporters ever do. You took note that this was said over and over again in mainstream reporting, in a bunch of publications, the New York Times, I believe Washington Post, and on, that 500, at least 500 killed in the hospital blast, according to the Palestinian Health Authority. And you asked those reporters at those publications, where is the statement where they said that, or who did you talk to in the Palestinian Health Authority that said that? Tell us what they told you.
Well, they told me nothing. This whole thing began because this was sort of a remarkable statement that within, a very short amount of time after an explosion at this hospital, we're talking about this is, in the midst of a chaotic war zone. It's at night, an explosion happens. It seemed odd to me that they were able to tally the number of dead with such precision so quickly. So something seemed a little off to me. And so as I often do, I wanted to find the actual source. I wanted to see not news outlets secondhand saying that the ministry said this, but where is the evidence that the health ministry spokesperson actually said these words? And no one linked to it. No one. So I started reaching out. I contacted two different journalists at the New York Times. I reached out to multiple people at the Associated Press and on down the line, and none of them provided evidence to me. And only the New York Times actually even responded, and that was from basically like a PR person there saying, go away, essentially.
So I'm curious, it sounds like you looked for quite some time for evidence that the spokesperson for the Ministry of Health ever said this. It took me about 5 minutes of Googling to find the primary source. It was reported directly by Anadolu Agency, which is a pretty big substantive news agency out of Turkey. They got the quote directly from the spokesperson, Ashraf al-Qudra, the same spokesperson that's been doing a lot of reporting on the fighting in Gaza. They said more than 500 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza on Tuesday. Health Ministry spokesman Ashraf al-Qudra told Anadolu directly. So it sounds like they got the primary quote directly from the source. I'm curious, did you not find this because you weren't looking on other news sources beyond mainstream media? Did you find this and deem it irreparable? What is the reason that you didn't quote this source in your paper or believe that, this didn't exist somewhere? I mean, it really didn't take me long to find this. I'm just curious what your process was.
Sure, yeah. I initially was looking at all the sort of major legacy media outlets in America and a few abroad. I don't typically look at Turkish media. However, the Turkish article you're referring to, they say that, but again, there's no evidence of this actual statement. Are you suggesting that the entire media establishment in America, New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, NPR, PBS, on down the line, all of them did their reporting based on this Turkish media outlet report? Because the interesting thing is, the one actual public statement where citizens, regular people themselves, can hear the words from the spokesperson was on Al Jazeera. And what he said publicly, not secondhand from a reporter at a Turkish news agency, but what he said publicly directly contradicts that statement.
Well, and what you're saying is, aren't you saying that go ahead, Jessica.
What was that public statement, I'm sorry, that contradicts this statement?
Right. So the only evidence that regular people actually have, the only public statement that people have access to, where it's not journalists reporting it secondhand, but an interview on Al Jazeera. It's in Arabic, where I hired 2 different Arabic translators to listen to the interview and then transcribe it into English, and in addition to Google Translate machine learning. So I had 2 humans and sort of Google working on this, and it's very, very clear that he said the word victims, which is in Arabic, victims or casualties, which does not mean dead. And in fact, when you listen to it or look at a transcript, in the sentence prior to the one in question, he differentiates between dead bodies and people who are victims or casualties who are injured. The word in Arabic that he was using for victims in the prior sentence, he then uses again. So it was unambiguous that he never in that interview suggested that there were at least 500 killed.
Well, and also, aren't you really saying that, you know, if it's a Turkish source, if it's Al Jazeera, it doesn't matter, as long as, like, the New York Times and whoever's reporting should say, if this were the case, 500 dead, the Palestinian health authorities say, according to Al Jazeera or according to a Turkish media source. Like, if that was their source for it, that should have been included in the reporting anyway. And the fact that they didn't further identify those is actually a problem I've noticed with the Times in particular on, like, every subject. They'll just attribute things, even if those things are first reported to other media outlets. They won't tell you what media outlet or who. They certainly won't link to it. That's something that I'm sure that's happened to us at The Hill before. This definitely happened to me in my capacity as a writer for Reason Magazine, where they just don't acknowledge the reporting that other outlets do. So in some sense, it's not, to me, the issue here is almost not, what the literal, if that figure is right or not, or who really knows yet, right? But it's the mainstream media was asserting it and then not giving you the information for why they were saying that, who had said that first to who. It could have been Al Jazeera, it could have been the Turkish media outlet, frankly. They should have just said that, so you would know.
That's right. In my view, there are a number of things that this is really a fascinating case study about really failures on a number of levels with how the sort of legacy media operates. And one of them, as you said, is where is the attribution? If they got it from Al Jazeera, say this is from an interview with Al Jazeera and put in a link to it. If they got it from the Turkish agency, then put that in. Instead, everything is written in this sort of, passive voice or this abstract from the health ministry per spokesperson. But no one has any clue. And not only, look, the journalists do not owe me personally a response. However, I think if you're writing an article and you include specific claims in your article, whether it's claims about statistics or statements that are attributed to someone, you damn well better include a link to that, or if you're not, then you are obligated to respond to whether it's another journalist like myself or regular citizens who are saying, hey, I want to see the original source. You've got to do it one way or the other. If you're not going to put it in your article, then you need to at least acknowledge people when they're asking for it. That's a reasonable expectation. It can't just be, trust me, bro. And I'll tell you what's even worse is I reached out to 2 different media people at the Associated Press, and this is literally their job, is to communicate with the media. And neither of them responded to multiple queries from me as well, where I said, look, is it the Associated Press's position that you publish claims, you don't give the original source, and you refuse to provide it when asked? And clearly the silence that I was met with, the answer is yes, that is the official position of the Associated Press.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead. Sorry, Jessica.
It turns out that 471 Palestinians have confirmed to have been killed by the airstrike on the hospital. It's still up for grabs as to where the airstrike came from. But 471 is 29 off from 500 at a time of war when hundreds are being killed. I mean, it also sounds like the number could be well above 500, given that the number of casualties typically exceeds those killed. And we have 6 hospitals shut down in Gaza. They have limited supplies and ability to treat casualties. So it sounds like the death toll after a week or so could end up actually being over 500, but only 29 off from 500. It seems pretty close to accurate. I'm curious, have you found any reporting that has been very far off from the ultimate death toll from the initial estimation and reporting?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is sort of a side issue from what the thrust of my reporting was about. I think these numbers are highly unstable, and there's going to be a lot of disagreement. There is a lot of disagreement about how reliable these numbers are. So whether it ultimately, the numbers were revised repeatedly from different officials, and then also, there were estimates made by, people outside of Gaza and outside of Hamas by other countries. So that's going to be a contentious point. What the number they're saying it's 479. That may or may not be true, I don't know. But that's an entirely separate issue from immediately after an explosion outside of a hospital in a war zone at night that the press ran with the story, at least 500 were killed. When the likelihood of that type of tally being made with such precision immediately after was extremely unlikely. And number two, none of them have provided evidence of that. And the only evidence we have that's public is something where the health spokesperson says something different, where he did not say at least 500 were killed. So the point here is not about, my reporting is not about the origin of the explosion. It's not about what the ultimate death toll is. Either way, this is a horrible tragedy, make no mistake. To me, what's interesting and really important is sort of how the sausage is made, and for people to understand when you're seeing headlines across every single media outlet that exists basically in America, and they're all saying the same thing, and none of them provided the original source, and the only public version of this that we have conflicts with the reporting they all have, that's a problem.
Right. When it's not linked or sourced, I think the reader's assumption is that that reporter talk to that representative, that spokesperson, that official. I mean, if I had an article where I give some figure and I say, according to David Zweig, or David Zweig says, you'd probably think, and then unless I was linking to something you've written or an appearance you've made, you'd probably think you told it to me. And like that's the kind of report, like in the days where journalists actually had to track down every fact they were supplying. It was even before the internet, right? It was actually sourced to conversations they were literally having every time. Now we have people can make statements, easier to release statements to the press or just to the general public on social media or whatever else. You can very easily include a link and show here's what I'm referring to. If you just say it's according to this official, or this official says, well, you assume that the reporter actually talked to the official, which was not the case for any of these outlets involved in this story.
Or maybe it's the case, but none of them are telling.
Right.
And that's quite strange. And I took this up several levels at the New York Times to a standards editor there. I mean, if they had interviewed this guy, why would you possibly not reveal that once you're being, questioned about it? Hey, what's the source? It's possible that a report was sent out via telegram, or that there's been, in my various sources who I'm working with and other people, some people are saying that messages were sent out via other channels. But if that's the case, why not just say so? And again, then that means you have this health minister who's directly contradicting himself, sending out something on, in a private Telegram account or whatever to certain journalists, and then saying something publicly that's completely different to Al Jazeera. I think, to my mind, the most likely explanation here is that most of these journalistic outlets, they follow Al Jazeera and a handful of other accounts. They saw it printed this way, even though it was incorrect, and then they just ran with it. Al Jazeera Arabic said one thing, and Al Jazeera English said something else. Now, which one are we going to believe? The one that's the actual source, where you can translate it from Arabic, or someone in Al Jazeera English wrote something different? So this whole thing is just a complete mess, in my view. And the issue is not about what the final number is. The issue is not about the bomb explosion, at least the one that I'm talking about. What's interesting to me is, what is the process that occurs when all of these outlets start reporting a story? And what are the consequences of when they all report something and then they refuse to reveal the source of that claim?
David, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.